is Linnea Rowse of the American Bird Conservancy is back. How many times have you presented to us in the past, Linnea?
I'm not sure. At least once, maybe twice.
I think a couple. But anyway,
mostly on chimney swifts.
Memorable program. So Linnea is a very good presenter with the American Bird Conservancy, and her program tonight is very appropriate, titled Michigan Spring Jewels Warbler Identification 101, which is good for probably most of us. I know we can always use tips and refreshers because they're pretty hard to identify compared to many things. So welcome back, Linnea. Thank you very much. And why don't you take it away?
All right, thank you. Let me get my screen shared here before I dive in. So that's all set up. And we'll start the slideshow. And does this look good to everyone?
Yes.
Yes.
Right, great. So I'm going to minimize that. Yeah, thanks for having me as a presenter again. I really enjoy interacting with you folks. I know there's a lot of birders that I know, but also folks I don't know. And seems like you have a really good community. My presentation tonight is, as we were talking about, it's about warblers. I get very excited this time of year with warblers returning on migration, and it seems like, you know, the floodgates of migration have opened up again, and all the warblers and all the other neotropical migrants are coming back our way, which is very exciting. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about a handful of warblers. We'll go through some identification tips, a little bit about some habitat management for specific bird species, not all of them. And, you know, we're a fairly small group, so hopefully we'll have some time at the end too if you have specific questions about identifications of any of these specific species or others that I didn't include, because there are far too many warblers to include in one presentation. So to start out with, wood warblers, as we have in North America, they're in the family Parulidae. They are neotropical migrants, meaning that they breed here in the north and they migrate through Central or South America for the winter. And they're really only here in our part of the world for maybe about a quarter of the year. So though we think of them as like, this is their home place, really they're spending a lot of time elsewhere too, which is pretty cool. For the most part, they're very small, colorful songbirds. Most, if not all, of warblers are insectivores or invertebrates, eating invertebrates. Compared to other bird species, they have pretty pointed bills adapted to that diet. And they're found in a variety of habitats, not just forests. So for example, this can be helpful with identification. You might be in a more mature hardwood forest and you see a warbler bopping around up high. Maybe it's a cerulean warbler. Northern water thrush, they spend more time along the ground near water. And some are seen in our area really just during migration. They're going up to the boreal forest. Some breed throughout Michigan, others are only in southern Michigan. So again, kind of using range maps and expectation of what habitat you're in can help you with identification. However, all bets kind of are off during migration because you'll get lots of mixed flocks of different species at hotspot stopover sites. This is just sort of a preview of something exciting that's coming out. And I know that this image has other bird species besides warblers, but we'll ignore that for now. This kind of depicts how different species use different areas of the forest specifically. And again, there's other habitats they use. But for example, different types of forests, from conifers to mixed woods to hardwoods, but also if they're using more of the ground level understory, if they're hanging out in the mid-story for most of the time, or if they're using more of the overstory. So you can see in the upper left, there's Blackburnian warbler. They really like conifers or softwoods, and they like to be up high. Compared to the goldwing warbler or chestnut-sided warbler in the lower right, both of those like shrubby young regenerating forest areas and more of the deciduous type of forest or hardwoods. This graphic comes from a new publication that is almost out, almost ready for the public, called the Forestry for Michigan Birds. There's a forest manager's guide and a landowner's guide to managing forests with birds in mind. So by that, I mean focusing on healthy and sustainable forest management, planning for things like forest harvests, but with tweaks to typical silvicultural methods. So, for example, with gold-winged warblers, we want to leave back residual trees, or for cerulean warblers, or even black-throated blue warblers, we might want to do quarter-acre openings within a more mature stand because they really need a lot of different structural diversity. So that's what this guide is all about. Keep an eye out for this. It's going to be coming out in the next month or so, and we'll be doing outreach workshops and even demonstration sites throughout Michigan for the rest of this year and in the future. So very exciting stuff. Back to warblers. When you're working on identification with any bird, but we're talking about warblers today, it's really important to focus on key field marks because you might just see a tail of a bird. You might just see its belly, or maybe you get to see it fly through the woods real quick, but you kind of only get a glance at what general color and shape it is. So looking at field marks can be really helpful, including the silhouette of a bird. So for example, a Nashville warbler, they're pretty small and compact, fine bill, compared to a pine warbler, which has a longer tail, kind of a longer looking body, compared to a black bull warbler, which is very chunky, kind of like a deep chested warbler, and they have a shorter tail than a pine warbler. Color impression can be useful. Tail pattern, for example, magnolia warblers, they have a very distinct white middle section of the tail. Wing bars can be useful, or face patterns. So they might have an eye ring or a partial eye ring. Maybe their throat is a specific color, like yellow-rumped warblers. Or maybe they have a cheek patch or auriculars. And I'm just going to point out on this bird here, and also females typically are drabber than the breeding spring males, with less bold markings. And of course, there are exceptions to that. So on this bird here, we've got this eyebrow or supercilium. We have the auriculars, sort of this blackish gray cheek patch. We have a black necklace and black streaks coming down the center of the chest. We have wing bars, and we have this characteristic tail, white patch in the tail, which in this photo is kind of hard to see it. So again, you may not see all the field marks or the whole part of the field mark, but this is a magnolia warbler female. Talking about more patterns to look for, the undertail patterns can be very useful. This image comes from the example of all the warblers, what the undersides of their tails look like. So some of these might be plain white, plain yellow. Maybe they have white in the tail, which many of the warblers do. Maybe they have patterns, like the black and white warbler has black spots. And in some cases, it might be diagnostic for a species. So again, there's that magnolia warbler. The underside of the tail shows sort of a white band across the middle section of the tail, not all the way to the tip. Other comparisons you can look for with identifying warblers are behaviors. So for example, we might have a bird in a tree that we see very actively foraging, gleaning insects, just kind of moving around like high energy. Or we might have a bird that is hawking or fleck hitching, just kind of sitting and waiting, and they may not all be warblers. Other behaviors that are helpful, you might have a bird that's creeping along a tree trunk like a nuthatch. It's probably a black and white warbler. Ovenbirds, they like to walk on the ground, kind of like a little miniature chicken. They like to walk and scratch through leaves to forage. Another great example of behavior is the palm warbler. They'll kind of just wag their tail up and down, and they kind of hang out low or even on the ground. Other things can be very, very useful for warbler identification. And actually for myself, I probably do between 90 to 95% 95% of my bird identification by voice, because for a lot of species, including warblers, you're not going to get a good chance to look at them. Or you might get a glance at part of them, maybe a field mark, and then the voice can help you really narrow it in. So when you're listening to birds, it's useful to break their song apart into different qualities. So rhythm, pitch, tone, and repetition. I have been getting more into looking at spectrograms or sonogram, which is essentially a graph of the sound. So when you're looking at this, time is on the x-axis. So from left to right, you're going farther along during the bird's song in time. And from low to high on the y-axis there on the left, that's the frequency. So how high the pitch is. So this can be useful. It's just a different learning method. Kind of helps you see the sound. In a way, it's similar to reading sheet music. And for me, with birds that are tricky to tell apart, they're two different species songs, sometimes seeing it can help me cement in my head, oh, that's what the difference sounds like. So kind of back to these other qualities of songs with rhythm, that's kind of like the bird's characteristic tempo. Pitch, most birds sing in a specific range, so smaller birds like warblers typically have higher voices, and larger birds like a raven, which is a completely different species, usually have very deep voices. Many birds' songs do change in pitch, so like the northern parula song, it rises in pitch. And the one on the graph here, we'll actually see this graph again later in my presentation, but it has sort of steady pitch and it goes lower and then it goes higher. The tone of a bird song can be hard to describe, but it can be really useful. And sometimes, just like with using mnemonics or a description of what the bird's song sounds like, describing the tone verbally to your friend or to yourself can help you kind of cement again what that sounds like. So for example, a bird's voice might be a clear whistle, might be harsh and scratchy, might be more liquid and flute-like. If it has a trill, it might be more musical and looping, or it might be a very dry trill. So those are good things to keep in mind. So from here, we're going to go into some different warbler species and some field marks for each of them, and what their sound is like. And we'll just kind of see where we go. So we've got the ovenbird. I heard my first ovenbirds of the season this week, which is exciting. They're very loud and they can be overwhelmingly loud compared to other birds that you hear in the forest. They love to sing constantly, very distinctively, sort of a teacher, teacher, teacher rhythm. Different field marks for these ovenbirds. They have orange and black racing stripes on their head, which aren't shown in this picture, but you can see them sometimes in the field. Again, like I said before, they walk on the ground. They're kind of like a little chicken. They have a very large eye and a bold white eye ring. In general, they're this olive grayish green brown above and their back and wings, almost like some of our thrushes, and they have a white belly with heavy streaks. They're typically found in a mature deciduous forest with an open understory, and leaf litter is very important because they build their nest on the ground in a little mound of leaves, like a little oven. Something that I learned recently is that there may be a correlation between ovenbirds and where there's heavy deer browse, because they really like that open understory, and with deer impacting forest regeneration may actually benefit ovenbirds, but that's a different story. So again, their song, loud, distinctive, teacher, teacher, teacher. And I will play that. Let me know if this does not come through. How'd that sound for everyone?
Not loud enough.
Okay. Well, I turn it up my volume and see if that will help.
Much better, much better.
All right, good. Good to know. Anyway, we'll go to the next bird. And again, this is showing the sonograph, or the sonogram of the bird's song. So you can see it kind of increases in loudness with that more dim grayish look to the left, and then it gets louder and blacker over time. All right, northern water thrush. This is another one of our larger warblers. They're pretty large-bodied, stout bill. They also like to spend a lot of time on the ground, walking. They do bob their tail kind of up and down as they're walking, which I find very cute. They have sort of a yellow and buffy underparts with dense brown streaks. And they have a finely streaked chin, which helps to tell them apart from Louisiana water thrush. And they have this buffy or whitish supercilium, which is that long eyebrow from the bill all the way to the back of the head there. And it's even in width. So again, to tell apart from Louisiana water thrush, which shouldn't really be up in northern Michigan anyway. But the Louisiana has a supercilium that flares at the back of the head, and it's like bright white. They typically hang out in woodland edges, near swamps, rivers, ponds, bogs, moist ravines, so kind of those riparian habitats. And they have a three-parted song. It's also very loud. Can be described as nice old ladies don't choo choo. I looked these up. I didn't come up with these myself, so just a little side note there. But here's their song. So kind of like three parts with the emphasis on the end. All right, so golden warbler. This is the warbler on my background, of my Zoom background here. It's a warbler that I spend quite a lot of time on in my professional life right now, doing habitat restoration. So if you have specific questions about golden warbler, I can probably answer those later. But talking about their field marks, they are generally kind of a gray and white bird. Bright orange crown, sorry, not orange, sorry, brain fart there. Bright yellow golden crown, as the name says, golden, and gold on the wing, golden wing warbler. They have sort of a chickadee-like look to their face with a black throat and a black mask. And they hang out in young forests, shrub wetlands, regenerating areas with residual trees. The males really love to perch up high on a tree that is left after a harvest and sing and attract a female and defend its territory against other males. Managing for golden warblers, they really like a lot of habitat diversity or heterogeneity. So if you're in an area, managing for golden warblers, sort of the best way to describe it is if you can take a few steps in any direction, you should be coming across a micro habitat difference. So I might be, standing right here, I might be on a clump of sedge, and I take a few steps and I run into an alder shrub that's regenerating. So it's, a few feet high, and I take a few more steps and I run into mature alder, and that's like 10, 15 feet high. And then another few steps, there's one of those residual trees, maybe one of the aspens. They also like to be near mature deciduous forests, because when they're young fledge out of the nest in these young regenerating areas, the adults actually take them pretty quickly over to the mature forest areas. Their song is buzzy, begins with a higher note, and described as sort of a Z buzz buzz buzz, or B buzz buzz buzz. I've heard people call them cricket birds, which, they do kind of sound insect-like. And golden warbler is very closely related to the blue-winged warbler. Blue-winged warblers and golden warblers do hybridize. They produce the Brewster's warbler with one hybridization, and if that hybrid mates with a golden warbler or a blue-winged warbler again, the second back cross hybrid is called the Lawrence's warbler, which is more rare. Blue-winged warblers are more of a yellow bird. They're bright yellow bodied. They have these blue-gray wings with white wing bars. They have a very strong black eye line. And just like golden warblers, they like young forest, shrubby fields. They're typically found in a little bit drier habitat, but they can use just the same habitat as golden warblers. Their song, again, very similar to golden warbler, which was, if you remember, the bee buzz buzz buzz. Blue-winged warbler is just a single bee buzz, and it has a different tone to it. kind of like somebody blowing raspberry, in my opinion. Anyway, our next bird, we have black and white warbler. These little warblers love to do a creeping behavior like nuthatches or brown creepers. They forage on tree trunks and branches. Oftentimes you'll see them completely upside down. And they have a black and white striped head, face, back, body. They're just black and white all over. They even have black spots in their undertail coverts, which is the feathers just underneath the tail. And that is a distinctive tail pattern. So if you only see the tail, it has black and white spots, you know what bird it is. They're found throughout Michigan in deciduous or mixed forests. And their song is a high, thin, 2-syllable notes described like a squeaky wheel. So I'll play that one. There are a few other warblers that have similar songs. If you don't listen carefully, sometimes the redstart can resemble the black and white warbler's squeaky wheel, or some of our other warblers too, but we'll get to those later. Tennessee warbler. These warblers are kind of a long-bodied look. They have bright green upper parts, plain whitish, light gray underside. The males in the spring especially have a contrasting gray head, so it contrasts between the gray and the yellow-green back. They have a dark eye line and a short supercilium, so kind of a white over the black there. And they're mostly found in coniferous or mixed forests. And they have a 3-parted song. It's kind of loud and sharp, and it accelerates across the 3 parts. Very sharp staccato notes. Starts a little slower, a little lower pitch, faster, and then almost a trill. Our next bird is a Nashville warbler, very closely related to the Tennessee warbler. They're also, they kind of have a gray head. It does contrast with their olive green back, but unlike the Tennessee, they have a yellow, kind of bright yellow underparts. They have no wing bars. They have a white eye ring that does stand out. I actually just saw a Nashville warbler today and heard lots of them singing. And the one I saw, it was, immediately, that's Nashville warbler, really stands out. If you're lucky, you might see the chestnut crown patch, which is just, it's sort of like a chestnut reddish color, just on the some of the crown feathers. It's hard to see. They typically hang out in second growth mixed woodlands, and they have a song that's similar to the Nashville warbler, but it kind of is almost like a bit of a squeaky wheel, and then with some staccato notes at the end. Common yellowthroat. We probably all know this warbler fairly well. It's found in many, many different types of habitat. So we see them frequently, or hear them probably more often than we see them. They have sort of a bandit-like look with a black mask. And the males especially have a nice pale border, grayish border above that black mask. And they have a yellow throat, and their entire underparts of their body are yellow or brownish yellow. They like to skulk around, a lot like wrens, pretty quick moving. And they like to hang out in shrubby areas, shrub wetlands, meadows, cattails, willow alder stands. And they have a clear oscillating song, that witchety, witchety, witchety. One note about mnemonics, or this description of what the song sounds like, is it may not be what you hear. And so if you have a different way to describe a bird's song, your own mnemonic, that can be really useful for helping you remember if you come up with it yourself. American redstart, they are a beautiful bright warbler The male is what's showing in this photo. So the males have so this black look with bright orange patches in their armpits, on their wings, and on their tail. The females and the young males, so the first year males, they're more of a grayish green, gray color with yellow patches, where the adult male has those orange patches. When they're foraging, they're very interesting to watch. They kind of flash their wings and tail, which is thought to kind of disturb insects, which they will then snap up. They're very quick to move, and they like to hang out in shrubby woodland edges. Their song is pretty variable, but in general, I think of it as kind of having the first softer part and then a very emphatic ending. And here's the sonogram to help you visualize that. Whoops, I'm sorry, we'll go back. Here's their song. Emphatic ending. Next bird is a very special bird to Michigan, the Kirtland's warbler. I'm sure most of you are familiar with the conservation background of Kirtland's warbler, which were listed as federally endangered, and we're down to only about 200 pairs in the 60s, I believe. They've really recovered well with habitat management for jack pine barrens habitat, and they're now at about 2,000 pairs. So that's a huge improvement. They are conservation reliant species though, meaning that they can't really survive without active habitat management. And for Kirtland's warbler, they really specialize in young jack pine. So that's between about 5 and 20 years of age. And that's when the jack pine trees have dense lower branches that help conceal their nests. And they like expansive habitat. So most of the habitat management for Kirtland's warbler is done on public lands, on Forest Service land or state land. But American Bird Conservancy, we're starting to work with some private landowners to do the same adjacent to where there's these larger tracts of public land management. So as Kirtland's warbler conservation moves on, part of the new goal is expanding the breeding range and what the available habitat is so that the population can continue to thrive. Kirtland's warblers, I was very excited to hear one today. I was in some jack pine and red pine mixed habitat, and it was just the male singing, the first one I've heard this year. So that was pretty exciting to hear. In general, they're one of our larger warblers, pretty large bodied, large bill, kind of a slate gray above, and they have streaking on the backs and the sides, and they have yellow below. They do have these eye arcs, which is not a full eye ring, but kind of above and below the eye. And their sound is very loud, kind of low pitched chip chip to wail. So that's what I heard out there today. Extra points if you recognize different bird species in the background of these recordings. The sterling warbler is another species that is of conservation concern. They use mature deciduous hardwood forests or riparian forests, and they really love large diameter oaks and hickories, especially with canopy gaps. So it can't just be let the forest grow, but adding in canopy gaps allows sunlight to reach the forest floor and kind of mid-story layers. And those mid-story and upper-story layers with sunlight reaching them, that's where branches can grow out into a gap, and that's where they love to place their nests. So those openings are really important, and that could be as small as a tree fall or as big as something like a 1/4 acre. In general, identifying them, they're a very unique shade of blue, kind of nothing else like them in our warblers here in North America. They have a thin blue throat stripe or necklace with flank streaks that kind of come down from that. Bold white wing bars. For the most part, you're probably going to be seeing the underside of sterling warblers, though they do sometimes come down a little bit from the canopy. And their song is sort of a rapid, buzzy, It accelerates, it rises in pitch, and you could describe it as beer, beer, a little bit, please. So that rise on the end. Similar in a way to black-throated blue warbler, which the black-throated blue warbler tends to be slower. The Blackburnian warbler, another one of these bright, gorgeous warblers. In the sunlight, their orange throat really looks like it's on fire, just like flame orange. And they also have this very distinct kind of triangular shaped auricular or cheek patch along with that eye line that's kind of distinctive for them. This is the adult male in this photo. The females are duller, but they still show sort of like the dark gray auricular triangle shape. They like to hang out in mature conifer forests or mixed forests. And if we're planning for forest management, it's important to think kind of like 50 years ahead, maybe leave some softwood inclusions or leave back pine trees as those residuals in sort of a legacy patch, so that when the forest has aged another 50 years, like there we go, we have the Blackburnian warbler habitat included. They have a very high-pitched song. It's pretty hard to hear, and it just kind of rises in pitch almost out of our hearing range. And they have a few different variations, but in general, soft, rising pitch. Our next bird here is the yellow warbler, and very aptly named. You know, a lot of warblers are yellow, but yellow warblers are truly like all yellow. The males, especially the older males, have a prominent kind of red streaking in their breast. The yellow tail is distinctive. So where they have yellow kind of on the inner parts of each tail feather, other warblers that have that pattern, that is white. So this yellow tail is distinctive. They like to hang out in moist open woodlands, shrubby meadows, often near water. I kind of think of them as an open habitat bird. Like if I go birding in, along a wetland area, I definitely expect to see yellow warblers. And their song is described as sweet, sweet, I'm so sweet. It's fast, it's repeated frequently. And then our next bird, the chestnut-sided warbler, sometimes their song can resemble the yellow warbler song pretty closely. Most often they have a more emphatic last syllable, which is helpful, but they overlap in habitat use and their songs can overlap, so it can be a little tricky. But chestnut-sided warblers, if you see them, they look a lot different than those yellow warblers. I've heard them described as like a calico warbler. They're sort of just a mishmash of patterns and colors. They have a sort of a bright yellow crown, black eye stripe. They have this just rich chestnut colored side stripe, white belly, and sort of greenish in their wings with sort of wing bars, but it's just kind of like a little mishmash. They love the shrubby fields. They'll use the same habitat as golden wing warblers too, sort of those dense regenerating sapling stands. But they'll also use openings within a more mature deciduous forest. And their song, again, sort of an emphasis on the last, second to last syllable, that penultimate syllable. And it has been described as please, please, please to meet ya. And that probably wasn't the best audio to match that please, please, please to meet ya. That audio was very similar to the yellow warbler, but I'll play it again and you can look up some of their other song variations later. So can be a little tricky one, but that's why, using audio, it is good to try to get your eyes on the bird too, if you can. Next warbler here, this is one of my very favorite warblers, black-throated blue warbler. They're sort of a dapper blue. They have a nice little blue smoking jacket with black ascot, and they have a white handkerchief patch in their wings. That white patch is on both sexes, so that female's in the lower right-hand corner. And they use mostly upland, deciduous, and mixed forests. Just like with cerulean warblers, small patch openings in forest can add that vertical structure because the sunlight reaches farther down. And for black-throated blue warblers, unlike ceruleans, which nest up high, black-throated blue warblers nest in the shrub layer. So having shrubs in the understory is very important for them. Their song is pretty slow, mostly wheezy or kind of buzzy. It rises in pitch throughout it, and it can be described as, "I'm so lazy." If you remember, that cerulean warbler song was much faster. Black-throated blue kind of takes their time. Next warbler here is the palm warbler. And I like these guys because I feel like I only ever see them on migration. So they're kind of a neat one to see. But they have a rufous cap, so reddish brown, prominent supercilium that's yellow. They are variable in color underneath, and because there's two subspecies, so they could be bright yellow like that one on the right, or they could be more whitish brown. And also the females are going to be duller again. With the palm warbler, they always have yellow undertail coverts. That's kind of a distinct mark there. And they have a white patch at the end of the tail, which you can see in that lower right-hand photo. So unlike the magnolia warbler, which had white kind of across the middle of the tail, the palm warbler is white as at the end of the tail. And they constantly bob their tail, just another behavior mark to look for. They like to use edges of mature bogs with scattered black spruce, so kind of like northern boreal forest. And they kind of have a weak, fuzzy trill. So let's listen to that one. I don't have a good mnemonic for this one. And I can hear other birds in the background there. So with the palm warbler, you know, in my own birding experience, I heard some palm warblers last week, but I didn't really register what they were. I was like, oh yeah, like warblers aren't here yet. We have yellow-rumped warblers that have a bit of a trill. So I got my binoculars on them, and lo and behold, there were 6 palm warblers hanging out in a little mixed flock. So our next species here is pine warbler, and they're pretty yellow overall. Their head and their breast are yellow. They have white wing bars. They have sort of a broken yellow eye ring and otherwise plain face. And they really like to use open, mature pine woodlands. Again, during migration, habitat choice can be a little bit different, but typically I associate pine warblers with pines. Their song is pretty short, trill, and it's very similar to, but a little bit more musical than a chipping sparrow. There can be overlap with both species. In general, I'll show you the sonograms here. Chipping sparrow is kind of like dry, not musical, just kind of like single pitch, steady tempo trill. And the pine warbler has a little bit more of like a looping musical quality to it. It's one of those that's really hard to describe, but we'll listen to both. So here's the pine warbler on the right with the sonogram. So you can kind of hear a little bit of musicality in there, just a little bit richer trill. And now I'm going to play the chipping sparrow, which is the dry. Oops, hang on 1 second. Sorry, they overlapped. I'm going to start over. This is the chipping sparrow. It's very dry trill. Not really any looping quality, not really any musicality there. More insect-like, so just a little different. So our next bird here, the yellow-rumped warbler, one of our earliest warbler migrants, and so they should be kind of tapering off. We typically have the myrtle warbler in the west of the Rockies, we have the Audubon's warbler, which is a different subspecies of the warbler. They're named for the bird in them. They have sort of this yellow patch right under the wings, like an armpit, and on the adult males, they'll have yellow on top of their head too, but that's not always something to look for. They have a white throat, myrtle ones do, and they're sort of like a blue-gray color on their back with white undersides and the black streaks along the sides too. They'll use coniferous, mixed forests. I've seen them in deciduous forests, especially in migration too. And their song, it's fairly soft, often in two-note phrases. And I thought that was very quiet, so I'll turn my volume up even more. Possibly too quiet for you guys to hear, but we'll just keep on going. So, black-throated green warbler. This is another one of our beautiful warblers. The males have this very black throat and upper breast. They have sort of this bright yellow face, and they're kind of a greenish yellow on the back, olive green. And they have two strong white wing bars. So you can't see that in this photo, but again, like birding, you're not going to see all the field marks. They'll use for breeding, they'll use coniferous and mixed forests, again, like black burning warbler, leaving back those softwood inclusions when you're doing a harvest of, for example, an aspen stand. 50 years down the road, there you've got your black burning warbler and black-throated green warbler habitat. Their song's pretty fast, similar to the black-throated blue warbler, except that they have a pitch that drops on that second part of the song. So kind of a z-z-z-z-z. So there's that sonogram from the example in the beginning. We'll play their song here. Z-z-z-z-z. And the Canada warbler, another pretty cool looking bird. I can't think of others that have such distinct marks as the Canada warbler. Just kind of a blue-gray on the upper parts. The adult males especially show this really neat black, almost speckling on the top of their head. They have a bold black necklace with streaks kind of coming down from it and completely yellow underneath. They don't have any wing bars, so just plain wings. And they have a white eye ring and yellow spectacles, which is sort of the color, the supraloral is what it's called. It's in front of their eyes, like between the bill and the eye. They use dense understory areas, low-lying, wet areas of forests. And for nesting habitat, what's really important for Canada warbler is to have lots of down-woody debris. So think of logs on the floor or tree tip-ups where maybe a tree fell over and the roots kind of came out of the ground. And they really like to nest in that kind of area, or even on like mossy hummocks or mossy logs. Their song is sort of one sharp chip note and then a rich warble. Hard to describe this one. And I think one description for them is actually you can't see me, or I'm in here, but you can't see me, I think is what it is. So I'm in here, but you can't see me, which is very appropriate because they like to skulk around in low areas. And there's lots more warblers. We're not going to go through any more. Some of these are only seen during migration in Michigan. Others maybe have more of a southern range coming up in the south part of the state. Others are just less common. Maybe they're rare, but lots more warblers. And this one on the right here, this is a prairie warbler, another species that is declining and not frequently seen in Michigan. So some of the strategies remember as you're going out there and identifying warblers, it's good to focus on shape, size, color, and the habitat they're using. And this doesn't apply just to warblers too, but you know, you're seeing other it helps you rule out something could or couldn't be. Just maybe don't look at the field guide and you see a bird or your outline sketch, if you're into that, and make comparisons. So maybe putting down field marks. You can take notes of the song, you can draw what you think the sound looks like, sort of like your own sonogram. And again, make notes and look at your field guide. I like to recommend, if you're just getting started, or even if you're reviewing, choose maybe just a few species to really get to know each spring, so that next year you have a solid foundation with those couple and you can add on a few more, and years you're just going to get better and better at the warblers. So maybe focus on a few, learn their song, their plumage, the field marks or parts of the bird that you might be more likely to see. And you could even kind of look around at your field guides, see what their range is in Michigan or what habitat to expect them in. And the sort of the flip side of that is when you are really familiar with the species. So for example, we'll just pick American redstart. You know, they're pretty distinct in their look, with the males being black and orange. You know, the warblers look like that. So you know when you see or hear something that is not that species. So that can help you learn the other ones. And my last tip here is just go birding early and often. Early in the day, early in the spring, early in time in general. Just the more you get out there and the more you practice, you're going to be winning your birds. And just a few resources, if anyone wants to jot these down. There's a couple of bird guides. There's lots of bird guides and lots of bird apps, but a few that are really great for warblers are the Warbler guide, which is where I pulled those like undertail images from. Birds of Michigan is helpful for just kind of narrowing it down to the state. Sibley guide, I love that for the illustrations. And then of course there's apps, which the Warbler guide has an associated app, which has the songs, and it kind of gives you like 360 views of the birds. I find Larkware useful for learning bird songs. Merlin is actually really great now. This is an app from Cornell, Lab of Ornithology, and I've heard it described as like the Shazam of bird songs. So you can hit record in the app and the app will help you identify what birds you're hearing. And websites, I love using allaboutbirds.org for all the natural history information. It has photos and audio. Xenocanto.org is where I pulled these sonograms and recordings from. And that's sort of just a public site where anyone can upload songs and what the birds are. And ABC Birds, American Bird Conservancy, does have a field guide on our website as well. You can check that out. And with that, I'd be happy to take questions or more talk about different field marks of some of these birds. But yeah, thank you for your attention, and it's been great talking with you all.
Thank you, Linnea. That was really great tips for identifying warblers and great photos. That publication you mentioned that you worked on for landowners or for forest management, I think last time you talked to us, that was like in the works or something. Is that something that like landowners should have, or do you mostly give that to foresters and loggers, or what's the focus audience on that?
Both. So there's, yep. So we have two versions. One has more detail about like prescriptions, and that's more targeted towards people who are managing forests or making forest plans, like the managers or professionals. But certainly landowners can definitely glean good tips for their own land from there. And then there's a version that's a little bit more focused on birds and the habitat, and a little bit less on the more silvicultural or forestry prescription. So there's two versions. Right now, we're basically sending it to print next week, and we'll be doing workshops starting in June, I believe. So to publicity. So.
I didn't quite catch that last part. You said that was a little garbled. Could you repeat that last two sentences you said?
Yeah, I'm sorry. my internet's completely slow, but we're at the stage we're sending it to print, and it will be available in PDF form or website, and also hard copies at workshop.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else have any questions?
Yeah, Linnea, I've been using the Merlin Voice ID app quite a bit this spring. Are you convinced that it's 100% accurate or 90% accurate, or do you have any idea?
It's so the Merlin app uses machine learning. And so it's not listening.
You're breaking up. We can't hear you. Now we've lost her altogether.
Well, that's too bad. There
Yeah.
were a few questions, and yeah, it seems like her internet didn't quite make it. So,
Hi, I'm sorry about that.
oh, there she's
Can you hear
back.
me?